The mansion stood high on the hill with golden lights glowing in every window, but behind those shining walls lived a man whose heart was darker than the night sky. The billionaire owned everything that money could buy, yet inside he felt only emptiness. He walked through the endless halls where his footsteps echoed against marble floors. Paintings of old masters stared down at him but gave no comfort. His dining table stretched long but no one sat with him. Food was served on silver trays yet it tasted of nothing. Every evening ended in silence, and the silence became his cruelest companion. The servants came and went like shadows, polite but distant. They obeyed but never spoke, they bowed but never cared, and the weight of loneliness grew heavier with each passing day. Among all the servants there was one who stood out though she never tried to. The maid, quiet, calm, moving from room to room with careful steps, her eyes often lowered, her face plain but carrying something unspoken, a sadness hidden beneath her silence. She worked late into the night, dusting the same places twice, folding curtains that were already neat, and he noticed her though he pretended not to. Her silence carried more weight than the chatter of hundreds. Sometimes when he passed by her in the hall, he felt the strange pull of her hidden world. He would catch her staring out the window as if searching for something far away. But the moment she noticed him, she quickly looked down and worked faster. He wondered what secrets lay in those tired eyes, but he never asked, for he was the billionaire and she was only the maid. One stormy evening the rain beat hard against the tall windows. Thunder rolled over the mansion. The air was heavy with tension. He sat alone in his study staring at papers he did not care to read, when he heard the sound of a window slamming against the wind, rising. He walked into the great hall and found her struggling to close it. The storm had forced it wide open, curtains flew wild, rain splashed into the polished floor. Without thinking he rushed forward. Together they pushed against the heavy glass, their hands brushing for a moment, and in that instant something broke inside him. He felt warmth where there had been only emptiness. She froze too, her eyes meeting his in shock. The world seemed to stop. Thunder roared but he heard only the sound of her breath. He should have stepped away. He should have thanked her and returned to his loneliness. But he didn't. The storm outside raged louder, and inside his heart a storm of its own began. He saw her face lit by the lightning, saw the fear, the pain, and the strength hidden in her silence, and he could not turn away. One mistake, one night. The kind of night that changes everything. He crossed the line he had kept all his life. He allowed loneliness to pull him into the world of the maid, and the maid, tired of hiding, tired of silence, allowed herself to fall for the man who had everything yet nothing. The rain poured down. The mansion groaned under the storm, and two souls bound by emptiness found each other in the shadows. They did not speak much. Words felt useless when silence carried so much weight. Yet every glance, every touch was louder than thunder. The night stretched long, and by the time dawn crept in through the tall windows the storm outside had passed. But the storm inside had only just begun. When the sun rose he sat at the edge of his bed staring at the floor, the sheets tangled, the air heavy with guilt and something deeper. He looked at the door she had walked through hours ago, his mind a battlefield of regret and longing. He knew the world would never forgive a mistake like this. Yet a part of him whispered that this mistake was the first real thing he had felt in years. He tried to bury the thought, tried to hide it under work, under gold, under silence. But the mansion had changed. It no longer echoed the same way. The air carried her presence like a secret no one dared to speak. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, a man of power, a man of wealth, yet broken by one night with a maid, and deep down he knew, though he refused to admit it, that this night would not remain hidden. It would return, it would haunt him, and it would demand a price far greater than anything his fortune could pay. The morning sun rose over the mansion but its golden light brought no peace. The billionaire sat at the edge of his bed staring at the polished floor, his mind restless. The storm outside had passed but a storm inside still raged. The memory of the night clung to him like a shadow. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was a mistake, something that would vanish with the dawn. But the silence of the mansion whispered otherwise. He expected to see her, the maid who had become part of his nights with her quiet footsteps. But when he entered the great hall she was not there. He walked into the dining room where servants moved like usual, setting the table with silver trays and fine china. He searched her face among them but found nothing. He asked one of the butlers where she was. The man looked down nervously and said she had left at dawn, gone without a word. His chest tightened though he showed nothing. He told himself it did not matter. She was just a maid. She had no place in his world. Yet every step he took through the endless corridors felt heavier without her presence. He walked into the room where they had fought the storm together, the window now shut, the curtains calm. But the air carried her memory. He touched the glass, recalling her trembling eyes lit by lightning, and his hand fell to his side as if weighted by guilt. Days passed and she did not return. Weeks rolled by and no one heard from her again. She had vanished like smoke, and he buried himself in work, meetings, contracts, parties filled with lights and laughter, but none of it touched him. He felt like a man drowning in a sea of gold, gasping for something real. He thought of her more often than he admitted. Sometimes he imagined her voice, though he had hardly ever heard her speak. Sometimes he thought he saw her shadow in the corner of the hall. But when he turned, it was always empty. He told himself to forget, but he couldn't. Years passed and the mansion grew colder. He built taller towers, bought new companies. But no matter how high he climbed, the emptiness grew deeper. One evening as he drove through the crowded city, his car slowed near a busy street. His eyes wandered idly until they froze on a sight that struck his chest like a blade. 2 children stood barefoot in the cold, their clothes torn, their small hands clutching tin bowls as they begged strangers for food, their faces pale, their eyes wide with hunger. But what made him stop breathing was not their suffering, it was their faces. Something about the curve of their cheeks, the shape of their eyes, even the way they stood. It felt like he was staring into a mirror of the past, his own blood staring back at him from the dirt of the streets. He ordered the driver to stop, his heart pounding as he stepped out into the noise and smoke of the city. The crowd parted in shock. The billionaire never walked among them. But he did not care. He walked closer, his shoes splashing in puddles, his breath uneven. The children looked up at him, confused, their eyes locking with his, and in that instant he knew the truth. His world tilted. The storm from years ago rose again, and before he could speak, a figure stepped from the shadows. A woman wrapped in a worn shawl, her hair tangled, her face older, her eyes still sharp, and his heart nearly stopped. It was her. The maid who had vanished without a word, the woman who haunted his nights. Now standing before him with 2 small children clinging to her hands, she pulled them back quickly, her eyes burning with anger and pain, her voice trembling but fierce. "These are your children." The words sliced through him like thunder splitting the sky. Everything he had buried, everything he had denied came crashing down. The storm he thought had ended years ago had only been waiting, and now it had returned to demand its price. The street was loud with horns and shouts, yet for the billionaire the world had gone silent. His eyes locked on the woman he once knew, the maid who had worked in his mansion, the woman who had vanished years ago carrying secrets he never asked about. Now she stood before him with 2 children pressed against her legs, their faces pale from hunger, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. He wanted to speak, but his throat closed. The truth was too sharp. He knew it before she said it, but hearing her voice made it real. "These are your children." The words burned through his chest like fire. He reached out a hand as if to touch them, but she stepped back, her arms wrapping protectively around the twins, her face hard as stone, anger and pain mixing in her eyes. "Where were you when they cried? Where were you when I begged for work? When I carried them alone?" Her voice shook, but it was filled with strength. People nearby began to stare, whispers rising as they recognized the powerful billionaire standing in the rain before a poor woman and 2 ragged children. Shame crawled up his spine. He was a man who owned towers, banks, ships. Yet he stood powerless before 2 small faces that mirrored his own. He tried to explain, "I didn't know, you should have told me." But his words sounded weak even to his own ears. She laughed bitterly, a sound without joy. "You had every chance to ask, every chance to see me. But you never looked. You lived in a world of gold while we starved in shadows." The children clung to her, confused. One of them looked up at him with innocent eyes that made his heart twist. He saw himself in that gaze. The same fire, the same sadness, and guilt crushed him. The crowd thickened, some curious, some mocking, pointing at the great man now cornered by his own secret. His guards moved closer to shield him, but he waved them off. He wanted no barrier between him and the truth. He stepped forward again, his voice softer. "Please, let me help now. Let me do something." Her eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "Help. Do you think money will erase years of hunger? Do you think a mansion will heal the wounds of nights spent on the street? No, this is not about you anymore. It is about them." The billionaire felt the weight of every word. His empire meant nothing against the raw pain in her eyes. The children shifted nervously, One coughed softly, the sound stabbing him with guilt. He wanted to kneel, to beg, but pride held him still for a moment before finally breaking. His knees touched the wet ground, shocking the crowd. The man of gold kneeling in the dirt before a woman and two hungry children. Whispers turned into gasps, cameras clicked from hidden corners, but he did not care. His eyes filled with tears as he whispered, "I cannot change the past, but I will not run from it anymore. I will not leave again." She stared at him long, her face unreadable. Then she pulled the children closer and turned away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving him kneeling in the rain, broken and breathless. He tried to follow, but the streets swallowed them quickly, his guards urging him back into the car. But as he sat inside dripping wet, staring out at the dark alleys, he knew his life had changed again. The secret he once buried had returned to haunt him, and now it would not let him rest. Somewhere out there his children were sleeping in shadows, and he could no longer pretend the mansion's silence was enough. He had been given a truth, and it demanded a price. He swore quietly to himself that he would find them again. No matter how deep he had to fall, no matter what he had to lose, for the storm that began one night in his mansion had only just begun to rage in his soul. The billionaire could not sleep that night. He tossed in his vast empty bed, but every time he closed his eyes he saw the faces of the twins, their hollow cheeks, their eyes that looked so much like his. He saw her too, the maid who had once worked in silence, the woman who had vanished without a trace, now returned with the truth he could not escape. He rose before dawn and walked the endless corridors of his mansion. The lights glowed, but the silence pressed down heavier than ever. Every corner reminded him of her presence. Every shadow whispered of what he had lost. He went to his office but could not read a single word on the papers laid before him. Numbers and contracts blurred. His empire felt meaningless. For what use was gold when his blood lived in rags? By morning he sent men to search the city. He gave them photographs of her from years ago. Told them to look in every corner, every alley, every forgotten street. But days passed and they returned with nothing. She was careful, she was hiding, and perhaps she did not want to be found. He drove himself through the city at night, ignoring the protests of his guards, rolling down tinted windows to stare into the crowds. Every child he saw made his heart race. Every woman in a shawl made him stop. But it was never them. Guilt gnawed at him, memories of that stormy night replaying over and over. He realized how blind he had been. How selfish, how he had never asked what pain she carried. He told himself he was a fool, a coward, but his resolve hardened. He would not let the past bury him again. One evening as the sky darkened he wandered through a broken part of the city. The streets filled with smoke from small fires, voices calling, children running barefoot. His car slowed near a fountain that no longer worked, only stones and weeds left, and there at the edge of the fountain he saw them. The twins sitting close together, their small hands drawing lines in the dirt. His breath caught, and then he saw her standing nearby, watching them with tired eyes, the same shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The sight rooted him to the ground. He stepped out slowly, the sound of his shoes on wet stone making her turn. Their eyes met. Her body stiffened instantly. She pulled the twins to her side, ready to flee. But he raised his hands, his voice soft. "Please, don't run. I just want to talk." She glared at him, her voice cold. "Talk? Now you remember how to talk. Where were your words when I needed them?" His chest tightened. He took another step forward. "I was blind. I was proud. I thought money was enough to fill my life, but I was wrong. I see it now." She laughed bitterly. "Money? You think gold can buy back the years I lost? The nights I worked until my hands bled. The mornings when I fed them scraps while you feasted in your halls. Do you think bread today erases hunger yesterday?" The twins looked between them, too young to understand but sensing the storm. One of them tugged at her dress, whispering with innocent curiosity, "Who is he?" The words pierced him deeper than her anger. They did not know him. They did not know their father. His throat ached. His eyes burned. He wanted to shout the truth, but the weight of his guilt silenced him. Instead he knelt, lowering himself to the ground, his voice trembling. "I cannot erase the past. But let me be here now. Let me try." Her eyes filled with tears though she tried to hold them back. She shook her head. "Words are nothing. I do not trust them anymore. Actions are all that remain. If you truly wish to be a father, then prove it. Not once, not today, but always." He nodded without hesitation, his voice steady. "I will, I swear it." She stared at him long, the twins clinging to her, the night air heavy with silence. Then she whispered, "We will see," and turned away, vanishing again into the shadows with the children, leaving him kneeling at the broken fountain. But this time he felt something different, not despair but determination. He knew the path ahead would be cruel, that enemies would rise, that his empire might collapse. But he also knew he could not turn back. For the first time in his life he had something worth losing everything for, and he would not let it slip away again. The mansion that once made him proud now felt like a cage of gold. The billionaire walked through its shining halls with a restless heart. Her words echoed in his mind like thunder. Prove it with actions, not words. He could not sleep, he could not eat. Every time he closed his eyes he saw the twins, their hungry eyes, their small hands, clutching their mother's dress. He knew she was right. He had spoken many promises in his life but none had weight. He needed to show her he was different now. But showing it meant tearing down the walls of pride he had built for years. The next morning he called a meeting with his closest advisors. They were shocked when he announced he would step back from several companies. They argued. They shouted. They told him he was making a mistake that would ruin everything. But he silenced them with, "One look, I built this empire, and if I choose to break it to save my family, then it is mine to break." Whispers spread quickly across the city. The great billionaire had gone mad. He was throwing away fortune. But he ignored the noise. He began selling properties he did not need, letting go of towers that stood as symbols of his pride. Every piece he gave up felt like losing a limb, but at the same time a strange relief filled him. As if the weight of false glory was lifting, he stopped attending glittering parties where fake smiles hid knives. He walked instead into the streets he once avoided. He ate simple food from stalls. He listened to the poor who told him their stories of hunger and pain. For the first time he saw life without the golden glass that once blinded him. And slowly the man who had lived above all began to walk among them. Some mocked him, some spat at his feet. But he did not strike back, he endured. Because he remembered the woman's eyes and the twins' frightened faces. Each insult felt like a step toward proving he was no longer the man of pride. One evening he returned to the broken fountain. She was there again with the children. She looked at him with suspicion. But her eyes softened slightly when she saw him carrying food in his own hands, not sent by servants but brought by himself. He placed it on the ground and sat beside the twins, letting his fine clothes stain against the dirt. At first they hesitated, but hunger pulled them forward. They ate quickly, their small faces lighting up with simple joy. He watched them silently, feeling warmth he had never known in his mansion. One of them glanced at him with cautious curiosity and he smiled gently, his heart breaking at the thought that his own children did not know him. When they grew tired and leaned against their mother, he looked at her, his voice steady. "I will not stop, I will give up everything if I must, but I will not abandon them again." She stared at him, her eyes wet. With tears she refused to let fall. Then she whispered, "If you mean it, then be ready, because the world will not forgive you easily, and neither will I." He nodded, knowing her trust was still far, knowing the road would be filled with enemies and trials. But determination burned stronger than ever. He returned to his mansion that night, looked at the endless lights, and whispered to himself that the empire he once lived for meant nothing now. All that mattered were the two small faces he had seen at the fountain, and he knew he would burn every coin, every stone, every crown he had, if that was the price to truly become their father. The rival had been watching from the shadows. A man who once feared the billionaire's power now smiled as he saw cracks forming in the golden empire. Rumors spread like wildfire that the great man had gone soft, that he spent his nights in broken alleys instead of boardrooms, that he cared more for street beggars than for business. Investors began pulling away, partners whispered betrayal, newspapers painted him as a fallen king. Yet through every headline and every whisper the billionaire kept walking the streets. He kept sitting beside the twins. He kept carrying food with his own hands. The woman still did not trust him, but she no longer turned away. She watched him, her sharp eyes scanning for lies, and she saw his clothes ruined by dirt, his hands carrying blisters from work he never did before. She saw him kneel before the children, without shame, but just as fragile trust began to grow, the rival struck harder. One evening when the billionaire arrived at the fountain he found the woman trembling with rage. She held her children close, her eyes burning. Men had come earlier, rough men with cruel voices. They mocked her, threatened her, told her she was a stain on the city. They said they knew her secret, that her children were born of sin. Her voice broke as she told him, "They followed us. They watched us. This is your world chasing us." He felt fury rise like fire in his chest, his fists clenched. He ordered his guards to find those men. But the rival was clever, never showing his own hand, only moving pieces on the board. The billionaire swore to her, "I will protect you. I will never let them touch you again." But she snapped back. Protection is not words shouted in anger. Protection is standing when storms come, storms that will not stop. Prove it. He met her gaze, and for the first time there was no fear in his voice. "Then let them come. I will not run. I will not hide. I will fight." The twins stared at him, their innocent eyes reflecting confusion and hope. One of them reached toward him before pulling back quickly. The small gesture cut him deeper than any blade. They wanted to trust, but fear held them. He swore silently that he would break that fear, even if it cost him everything. Days later the rival launched his move openly. A press conference filled with flashing cameras. He held up forged documents, twisted pictures. He told the world the billionaire had abandoned his maid and children, that he was a liar, a hypocrite, that he had fallen into madness. The city roared with scandal. The empire shook harder. But the billionaire did not bend. He faced the cameras himself, his voice steady. "Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I was blind. But I will not deny them again. Those children are mine." Silence fell across the room. The truth spoken by the man himself. It spread faster than any lie, and though his enemies laughed, though his empire cracked, he felt lighter, for he had finally stopped hiding. But the rival was not finished. From the shadows he sent more men, sharper threats, darker plans, and the billionaire knew the fight had only begun. He returned to the fountain that night, sat with the twins in the cold, and whispered to himself that he would stand against every enemy, burn every wall of gold, face every storm. Because for the first time in his life he was not fighting for wealth, he was fighting for family. The rival grew more dangerous as his lies spread deeper. Businessmen who once bowed before the billionaire now crossed the street to avoid him. Newspapers printed cruel stories about the maid and the twins, calling them beggars who had trapped a rich man. Cameras followed every step, twisting every image, turning his fall into entertainment for the city. But the billionaire did not retreat. Every evening he returned to the broken fountain, or the dark alleys, sitting on the ground with his children, carrying food, listening to their laughter slowly return. The woman watched with cautious eyes, her heart torn between anger and reluctant belief. She had seen him walk away once before and she feared he might do it again. Yet every day he came back, and each time he looked more like a man stripped of gold and more like a father learning love. But the rival had prepared something darker. He knew attacking with words was not enough. He wanted to break the man completely. One night as the billionaire drove through the city searching for them, he saw smoke rising in the distance. His heart pounded. He ordered the car forward and found the shelter where the woman and twins had been staying, consumed by flames. People shouted, water buckets flew, chaos filled the street. Without thinking he leapt from the car and ran into the fire, ignoring the heat, ignoring the shouts of his guards. He stumbled through smoke until he saw the twins huddled against a wall of fire, their mother shielding them with her body, her face streaked with ash, her eyes wide with fear. He charged forward, covering them with his coat, lifting the children into his arms, coughing as the smoke tore his lungs. Together they stumbled out into the cold night air. The crowd gasped as the billionaire fell to his knees, his hands burned, his clothes scorched, but the twins safe in his arms, the woman clutching them tightly, her tears falling onto his face. For the first time she whispered through trembling lips, "You saved them." He tried to speak but only coughed, his voice raw, "I will always save them." The rival watched from the shadows, furious that his fire had not destroyed but instead strengthened the bond he had tried to break. The next morning the city woke to headlines of the billionaire carrying children out of flames. Some called it madness, some called it redemption, but for him it was neither. It was simply truth. He had finally learned what it meant to fight for something beyond pride. Yet the rival was not done. He swore the next strike would not fail, and as the billionaire sat with his family that night, their small hands clinging to his, he felt a chill deep inside, a whisper that the battle was far from over, the storm still rising, and he would need to stand stronger than ever to protect what little light he had finally found in the darkness. The fire had not broken him. It had only made his resolve stronger. But the rival was furious and more determined to crush him. The city whispered louder now, some praising the billionaire for his courage, others mocking him for lowering himself to beggars. Investors turned away completely, projects collapsed. The empire he built with decades of blood and sweat slipped from his hands like sand. Yet he did not care. He walked through the streets each day with the twins beside him, their hands in his. The woman walking a step behind, still cautious but no longer pulling them away. Every smile from the children gave him strength, every laugh reminded him what mattered. But the rival had spies everywhere. He studied every move, waiting for the moment to strike again. One evening as the billionaire stepped out of his car near the fountain, a group of men surrounded him, cameras flashing, questions shouted, reporters accusing him of scandal. One of them thrust a paper into his face. Forged documents claiming the twins were not his, claiming the woman was a liar who sought his fortune. The crowd jeered, some spat. The children clung to their mother in fear. The billionaire stood tall though his chest burned. He took the paper, tore it in front of them, and shouted, "These lies will not silence me. These children are mine." His voice thundered across the square. Silence fell for a moment before chaos rose again. But the woman looked at him differently now, her eyes wet with unspoken words. Later that night, as they sat in the dark alley, she told him softly, "They will keep coming. They will not stop until you lose everything." He looked at her and whispered, "Then let them come. I have already lost everything that did not matter. Now I have something worth fighting for." She turned away quickly, but he saw the tears she tried to hide. Meanwhile, the rival prepared his final blow. He called a grand meeting with board members, judges, and officials. He planned to destroy the billionaire not only in business but in the eyes of the law, to paint him as unfit, unstable, dangerous. He spread word that the children were born of shame, that the billionaire was a fraud who had fallen into madness. The city waited for the spectacle. The man of gold dragged before the world, but the billionaire was ready. He no longer feared the fall, for he had already fallen and found something greater in the dirt. He knew the rival's plan was dangerous. He knew the path ahead could end everything. Yet he also knew he could not run. He would stand in the light of every camera, in the judgment of every eye. And this time he would not hide, because for the first time in his life he had nothing to protect but the truth. And he swore silently as he held the twins close that no lie, no rival, no empire would ever take them from him again. The rival moved quickly, determined to crush the billionaire once and for all. He called the media, bribed officials, and filled the city with poisonous words. Every street corner echoed with lies about the Maid, about the twins, about the man who once ruled the empire of gold. Headlines screamed that the children were not his, that he had gone mad, that he had burned his fortune for beggars. But behind the noise darker moves unfolded. The rival sent men into the alleys to follow the woman and her children, to frighten them, to corner them so they would run. One evening when the billionaire arrived at the fountain, he found the twins crying, clinging to their mother as strangers vanished into the shadows. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She shouted at him with trembling rage, "This is your fault. Your world is hunting us. You brought danger into their lives." His heart sank. He wanted to speak, but she turned away, clutching the children. Yet even in her anger he saw the truth. She was scared, but she had not left. She still stood there, still waiting to see if he was truly the man he claimed to be. The rival meanwhile prepared his final strike. He gathered judges and powerful men into a great hall. He planned to drag the billionaire into the light and expose him as a fraud. The invitation spread quickly. The city waited for the fall of the once untouchable man. The night before the hearing, the billionaire sat alone in his mansion, staring at the golden walls that now felt like chains. He thought of the twins, of their small hands reaching for him, of the fire that nearly took them, of the hunger that shaped them. And he knew he could not hide anymore. He whispered to himself that he would walk into the hall, not as a king of gold but as a father. The next morning the hall was full, cameras flashing, reporters shouting. The rival standing at the center with his cruel smile. He raised forged papers, twisted photographs, and shouted that the billionaire was a liar, that he was unfit, that he had lost his mind. The crowd jeered, the officials watched coldly, and for a moment silence hung heavy. Then the billionaire stepped forward, his face calm, his voice steady. He did not deny, he did not beg, he spoke the truth. "I made mistakes. I was blind. I failed them when they needed me most. But I will not fail them again. Those children are mine." Gasps filled the hall. The rival shouted, "Liar, liar." But before the noise could rise again, the doors opened and she walked in, the maid, her shawl wrapped tightly, the twins clutching her hands. The hall froze, every eye turned to them. The children looked small and fragile, but their eyes shone with something stronger than fear. They ran forward, breaking free from her hands, and clung to the billionaire. The rival turned pale. His lies collapsing in front of the truth the world now saw with their own eyes. The billionaire bent to his knees, holding them tight, his tears falling openly, and in that moment the hall was silent except for the small voices of the twins whispering the word that broke every chain around his heart. Father. The great hall was filled with noise, cameras flashing, reporters shouting, men in suits whispering as the rival stood at the center with his cruel smile. He believed victory was already his. He raised forged papers and twisted photographs, shouting that the billionaire was a liar, a fraud, a man who had fallen from grace and dragged a poor woman and her children into shame. The crowd jeered, the officials frowned. It seemed the end had come. But then the doors creaked open and silence spread like fire. She entered, the maid who had once worked in the mansion. Her shawl torn but her back straight, and by her side the twins held tightly to her hands, their faces pale yet shining with courage. Every head turned, every camera flashed. The rival's smirk faltered for the first time. The billionaire's heart pounded as he stepped forward, his voice trembling but strong. I will not hide anymore. Yes, I was blind. Yes, I failed. But I will not fail them again. These are my children. His words rolled like thunder, shaking the hall. The rival shouted liar, but his voice was drowned as the twins broke free of their mother's grip and ran across the hall, their small arms wrapping around the billionaire's legs, their voices soft but clear. Father. The sound silenced every whisper, every accusation. No forged paper could fight that truth. The billionaire knelt, his tears falling freely as he held them close. The woman stood still, her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. She looked at him and for the first time her gaze softened. The rival shouted louder, desperate. But the crowd turned on him. Questions flew at him. Where was your proof now? Where were your lies? His face turned pale as the power he had built on deception crumbled before the truth of two small voices. The officials who once doubted now saw with their own eyes. The reporters who once mocked now captured the moment that would spread across the city. The billionaire no longer cared for gold or reputation. He stood not as a man of wealth but as a man who had lost everything to gain the only thing that mattered, a family. He rose holding the twins in his arms, the woman slowly stepping closer until she stood beside him. The hall echoed not with jeers but with silence heavy with respect. The rival fled in disgrace, his empire of lies collapsing like dust. The billionaire walked out of the hall with the children in his arms and the woman by his side. The city lights flashing but his heart lighter than it had ever been. The mansion on the hill still stood but it no longer called to him. For he had found a new home, not built of marble and gold but of laughter and love. The night that began with one mistake had ended with redemption. The secret that haunted him had become the truth that saved him. And as he looked down at the twins whispering father again, he knew his life had truly begun.